Tuesday. This is the week before the everyone starts disappearing for the holidays. Happy to have you on.
Yeah, definitely excited to be here. Excited to chat about helium in 2025 as well.
Yeah, I'll try to keep the points on topic and not send us off into the weird realms of all of the crazy stuff we like to follow. So anyway, I guess I should formally introduce you. Nick, you are at Blockworks. You work on the Blockworks research team, and you also drive a channel called Deep Impulse. And so I think briefly we can highlight we've been showing off on the helium side this new dashboard that the Blockworks research team has put together, which has been really exciting. We've been getting a bunch of awesome feedback. People are learning about what the network is up to. I have to give a small shout out to Siegfried. I think last night gave a bunch of little tips that it sounds like the team has already implemented a bunch of those, right?
Yep, we're in the process of getting everything pushed and should be live soon. I will shoot you an update to be able to post. But yeah, generally it's a Blockworks dashboard for helium is like one of probably the first thing that I tried to get over the line after joining Blockworks, and it's been awesome to see it come to fruition.
Yeah, you guys crushed it too. It is thorough and clear and super well organized, which is a hard challenge for everything that helium touches. So should be make everything after that super easy. Um, well, let's dive right into it. So this shows a little bit of our state of helium in 2025. We get to do a little bit of a look back and a recap of what helium has been up to this year. Uh, just kicking things off, Nick, from your you're an analyst, from your perspective, what really stood out to you about helium's trajectory this year?
Yeah, I guess as a preface, I've been deep in the weeds with helium since 2020-ish, early 2020. Um, have always been a big supporter of the project, but have found that in 2025, the increased transparency from both, the Helium Foundation and Helium as a product has really, I think, put helium back into the spotlight in a lot of ways. Um, One way that I think that's happened is through this buyback and burn mechanism, which is something that the community pushed for and was sort of implemented very quickly,
Mhm.
um, at the community's request. And I think there's just been quite a bit more disclosure from both Nova Labs and the Helium Mobile team, as well as the Helium Foundation around, what is the scope of the project? What is the current status of A, the financial side of the network, and B, the the wireless side of the network, which I think are in a way decoupled, and probably the financial side is what gets the most press, but the most impressive piece here is your wireless network.
Yeah, well,
Um,
explaining that a little bit for folks that might be joining in, this is the Helium Mobile MVNO that you're talking about, right?
Correct, yeah, not to be confused with the Helium Mobile Network.
Always a challenge. I was trying to break that apart on a podcast yesterday. Uh, and I guess, yeah, the really wild thing there, if you look at it on its surface, is this is a telco that has direct reporting of every sign up and every revenue piece. And like we are more transparent than really anything else out there, in at least my perspective. Is that sort of match from what you've been seeing?
Yeah, I would say so. It's definitely in a place where, I mean, like if you're a telco analyst, a traditional telco analyst, you're making assumptions every quarter, like prior to earnings calls and all that kind of stuff. And even so, many of the major MNOs and MVNOs that are out there today really don't disclose their subscriber figures, and those numbers have to be either estimated or derived from financial data. And so, A, it's really cool to see the level of transparency that we're seeing from the MVNO itself, but B, because of the nature of the network and everything being on chain, it has been awesome to, be able to dive into the financials, be able to perform complex analysis on the network, and have everything be verifiable on chain at the same time.
Cool. So let's take us I'm trying to think of everything that's happened this year. It's actually really hard. I am 100% forward focused most of the time, and I always forget about the stuff we've launched. But earlier this year, I think we had the early versions of Helium World out there. We started publishing some of those stats you're talking about. Gosh, we hadn't even talked about like moving into Brazil and some of these other things that the team has been working on. Are there any other sort of standout things like outside of the analytics that I'm trying to think of all of the landmarks. There've been so many.
I think I'll give you two. Number one being the return to HNT, sort of a
Oh yeah.
slow deprecation of the IoT and mobile tokens, and unifying the ecosystem around one asset. That has been awesome to see. It's been really cool to be able to explain helium to people better from an economic perspective, and I think simplify things for both deployers and for the community slash investors. But B, also it's just been, the system really like unified around that. And I think that simplified things from a technical perspective. And so everything just sort of feels like butter as a deployer now. If you are, claiming rewards, if you are staking, like everything can be managed through the Helium app now. And it felt like the improved UX slash deployer experience, if you want to call that a DX.
I think about this a lot, by the way.
Like really like came into the spotlight right around the time that we did the return to HNT. So that has been super cool. And the dismissal of the SEC's case against Helium and Nova Labs was really awesome to see. I think that we needed a regime change for that to happen. But since that point, like that was sort of the inflection point where now we're seeing no action letters coming from the SEC for other DePIN projects.
Yep. Yeah, I think, well, the first one, of course, being 00 with their no action letter, which has really felt like a kicking off this snowball of really cool things to be able to happen in DePIN. Yeah, I don't even know how I could forget about that. That was a huge, huge milestone as far as just even crypto, right? Like that is a pivotal moment for what we can do with decentralized infrastructure. Is there anything that has like particularly surprised you this year?
I think, and this is maybe not the best take, but I had assumed that, Helium Mobile would, the carrier, Helium Mobile, the carrier, would eventually hit a wall with onboarding users without some sort of new mechanism, and that really has not been the case. It can continuing to scale the total onboarding month over month, significant growth quarter over quarter, and
we're like that close to 600,000 signups.
Wow. And I mean, I think 2026 is going to be the year where we see it hit 1 million. But at the same time, like the product experience of Helium Mobile has gotten drastically better. I've moved myself, my friends, all of my family over to Helium Mobile because it is just a better product. And especially when you're comparing to other like sort of prepaid MVNOs, there's nothing out there that's quite as good.
Yeah, I've had similar experiences. I have family members who are finally starting to understand what I do a little bit because I'm able to get them on and they start experiencing it and maybe connect to a hotspot when they go to Taco Bell or whatever. Yeah, the Helium Mobile subscriber product has certainly been a surprise. That chart that I was just looking at, quoting that almost 600,000 is almost a straight line up since like April of this year. Pretty wild. People like free phone plans. They like $15 a month phone plans and everything in between.
And in a way, like the network recently deprecated the mapping rewards that you earned through the Helium Mobile plan. And you would think, I mean, it's a great product, but at the same time, you would think that there were people who are maybe using that as their secondary or tertiary phone plan, and they were just trying to farm rewards. But it doesn't seem like there's been any decline in onboarding since that point. I mean, it's regardless of the rewards they're earning, it's just a better product.
Right. Yeah, the rewards was like a really novel concept, but in practice, like the work that had to be done sort of shutting down gaming and the various things like that, it just kind of outweighed the benefit. And I think a lot of people were outside of crypto may be confused by it. So pulling back to a more focused feature set, I think really helped us there. Let's get into this dashboard a little bit. So we were talking earlier about the Blockworks research dashboard on Helium. So for somebody looking at it for the first time, give me like a rundown of like where somebody should start to sort of understand the critical pieces, and then like get into the weeds, if you will, of everything that's in there.
Yeah, I think it really depends on who you are and if you're looking for a starting place. If you're an investor, I think you'll probably be most familiar with the financials tab, where you'll see things like the inflation rate, revenue, annual revenue or annualized revenue, and buybacks, as well as our financial statements that we provide. And I think if you're more on like the community member / deployer side of things, the mobile and IoT tabs are probably where you're going to see the most familiar information. Stats like data transfer, average rewards, and then network specific metrics. So like packets for IoT, gigabytes of data transfer, and daily active users for mobile. And then you've sort of got a couple other spots on there. You've got a tab for the token. So if you're interested purely in just like the token from an on-chain fundamentals standpoint, you've got all the data for the token itself, buybacks, plus sort of the staking ecosystem, and then what the DEX and centralized exchange landscape looks like for HNT. And then your overview tab, I think, sort of sums up the most important metrics across the entire ecosystem in 6 very succinct charts.
In your perspective, having gone really deep in this, is there a part of this that you feel like people tend to overlook?
Yeah, I think I spend most of my time on the mobile tab personally. In terms of things that are being overlooked, I would probably say like these are some of the sort of nerdy things that I really enjoy, but aren't super crucial to like the network operating one way or another, but types of hotspot deployments, and then the onboarding frequency, so like a time series of hotspot onboards. It's awesome to see the increase in data-only hotspots via Helium Plus, but B, it's been awesome to see, that I don't think there's been a single day in 2025 that there weren't at least a few hotspots deployed, and that's something that was definitely not the case sort of at the latter half of 2024.
Yeah. I guess that kind of goes back to that deployer experience that you were talking about before, which it has to be easy, it has to be clean, it has to be reliable, get these hotspots set up. Any advice for, so talking about hotspot operators and owners, any advice for them as they try to start making sense of that data?
Yeah, I think, again, this goes back to who you are. If you're a deployer, you're probably already looking at these metrics, maybe not all of them, but looking at similar metrics across other sources, or maybe even from the Blockworks dashboard today. And I would recommend diving into the financials. I mean, that's the part of the network that you're probably not digging into on a day-to-day basis. And I think it's, it's a sort of a church and state situation where if you're really interested in the network itself, it's important to understand the financials. And then likewise, if you're an investor who's regularly checking stats on the token, on the financials, I would recommend diving into the wireless networks, both IoT and mobile, checking out performance and checking out trends on both of those, because both of those sources are like deeply tied into the financials.
Yeah. It's fun hearing you talk about this, because one of the challenges that I've had in working with my team building Helium World and some of this other stuff is trying to understand what small subset of analytics can I show to give the best cross section for the investor persona, for the builder persona, for the marketing persona. It's hard trying to pick all that stuff. And I guess we should talk about this too. You mentioned earlier before the show the Lightspeed platform that got announced at Breakpoint. Can you explain a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah, so we announced at Breakpoint on stage and teased a little bit of a product demo on Blockworks' new Lightspeed platform, which will be sort of an investor relations portal for the Solana ecosystem. Just for the Solana ecosystem today, but I believe we're going to support 10 plus projects at launch and then continually expand from there. But what was super interesting is that in the application screenshots that they shared on stage, Helium was one of that first batch of protocols that'll be on the platform when it goes live next quarter.
That's exciting.
Which
And
I
this
think,
is going to be.
go ahead.
Oh, is this going to be a public tool that anyone can access? Is it a permissioned or like a sign up thing?
It will be a public tool. I don't have a ton of details that I'm able to disclose at this point, but yeah, it'll be
Well,
going
nice
live
try.
next quarter. It should be public. And I guess in comparison to the current Blockworks dashboard, it's going to have a lot of the similar data that we're seeing today. But in addition, you'll also be seeing sort of quarterly filings, financial statements, and then transparency analysis via our token transparency framework and all the stuff that goes in with that kind of stuff. So tying it back to what I chatted about in the beginning, the increased transparency on the Helium network has been great, but I think this sort of takes it to another level in 2026.
Cool. That's exciting. I'm sure you'll see posts from us sort of supporting that when that lands. And I'll certainly be diving in there to sort of see what's going on. So let's look a little bit more broadly. Looking forward, what the community should be paying attention to. As somebody tracking this deep in space with Helium and all of the other projects, what are the trends or the macros that you think people should be paying attention to?
Yeah, I think if you're investing in tokens today, especially tokens with on-chain revenue, one of the things that you pay the most attention to is token burns. And I'm going to argue that burning HNT is not the key metric in the Helium ecosystem. It's burning data credits. You could, you could burn $1 million of HNT today, but until you redeem those data credits, there's really not any financial activity happening on the network. And so DC burn is the metric that most deployers/investors in the ecosystem track today. And yeah, I would say that's probably the key. If I had to pick one key metric that everyone should be following, that's it. And I think if you pull up the chart, the results would surprise you. It's been a very positive year for DC burn.
Yeah.
Additionally, the deflation rate/inflation rate is currently sustaining net deflation. That's been super awesome to see. There's obviously a little bit of variability in that, and I think is really correlated to the day of the week. From what I've seen, given that the most mobile data is consumed Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But that said, that's a metric I pay really close attention to, and probably the one that has really become a core part of the narrative in 2025. And then the last metric that I'll throw you would be mobile data transfer, because you can sort of, at least where the network is today, you can use that as a proxy for pretty much everything else. Like if that line is going up, everything else is moving favorably as well.
Yeah. 65 terabytes in the last day, according to my little thing that I keep on my desk. We're going to get you one of these. These are fun.
That is awesome.
Yeah. Are there any like milestones or developments that you're keeping an eye on upcoming?
Yeah, I think international expansion is key, right? Obviously, Helium hasn't saturated the US market, but the path to scaling, I really feel like, is international expansion via and like primarily in the short term, Latin American MVNOs, but generally there's no reason why Wi-Fi offload couldn't expand globally, right? Like maybe there's a few countries out there that have specific restrictions that the Helium network wouldn't be able to facilitate, but I would say the vast majority, 99% of countries could benefit from a Helium style solution. And many of those countries don't have any sort of competitive infrastructure in place today.
Right. Yeah, I guess one of the key things that we've seen as a difference with the mobile network versus the rollout of the IoT network goes back to this chicken and egg problem that used to be a really big part of the narrative of growing the networks. And these rollouts, we're starting to tie them more with the demand. So making sure that there's demand in a region before we go incentivize a network, because I think you oversupply, and then if the demand doesn't fit, then people are upset, and it doesn't really play out really super well in the long run. So with this expansion into Mexico, we're working with Movistar Telefonica in Brazil, Mambo, and then TBD, some more stuff in there. Um, is there a country that you are particularly excited about outside of Mexico and Brazil?
I really feel like any emerging market is a great fit. Maybe that's not the case, right? Like India has a pretty saturated market, but
And
something
the cost
like,
per gigabyte is tiny there. So yeah.
yeah, but like Southeast Asian countries, really what you're looking for is countries that are able to skip the broadband moment, right? Where maybe they have, lines in place, there's no fiber live in the country, but cell towers are few and far between in rural areas, and most people are actively traveling to a convenience store or a
Mhm.
local library to connect to the internet every day.
Mhm.
For those people, having access to the Helium network allows them to grab a SIM card at their local store, and if Helium is partnered with that MVNO, be able to use that infrastructure even when they're not close to a compatible cell tower, because you've got your Helium Mobile Mini cell tower. Um, I'm curious, you guys launched your wait list this week or
Mhm.
last week maybe for expansion to other new countries. What is the status of the wait list look like today in terms of like where do people want Helium to expand next?
That is a good question. I actually could see us putting a little like leaderboard together there. I have to go get those numbers. I haven't looked at them yet. Still waiting for data to come in. But yeah, I think the really interesting thing there is there's a lot of irons in the fire in terms of countries that we could, push the gas pedal on a little bit. So a bit of understanding that deployer pressure, I think, is going to help guide us there. So those signups are actually really helpful in the decision-making process there.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what the community wants versus, sort of where the untapped deployer base is, right? And if you can find a happy marriage there, it sounds
Yep.
like an awesome opportunity.
Yeah, there's a good cross, like you were talking about, between like people having to go to a convenience store to get connected and where we can go build the supply and demand and all of the other stuff. So yeah, a lot of opportunity around expansion, which, I was talking about this, I think earlier this week. We hadn't seen a lot of regional expansion from the Helium team in 2025. But now that we've built a lot of this infrastructure, we are so close to the finish line with Telefonica. There's end-to-end tests are working and everything. Uh, we actually have the toolkit now, the basis to go do a bunch more of these regional expansions. So you see a sort of contraction as we get all that infrastructure together. Uh, my bet, my my hope here is 2026 is that expansion period. We're going to see a lot more people involved. Um, Taking this outside of Helium a little bit, uh, DePIN is a huge space. Is there any other stuff that you are really following closely, or you're excited, or maybe is in the early stages that you've been seeing?
Yeah, for a long time I've been saying that like wireless is where DePIN found product market fit first. And my assumption has been that energy networks would be the next to scale,
Mhm.
and to sort of meet the demand that is out there today. And so in that space, I think we're sort of at the inflection point right now where I think 2026 is going to be a crucial year for projects like Fuse, like Daylight, and their new DayFi product, as well as Glow.
Mhm.
Um,
Sourceful is working in Europe, and yeah.
and yeah, Sourceful as well. They were almost a sub-DAO. That's some good helium lore.
It is, yeah, that's good. Some helium lore. Great team.
And I think like energy is a very hard challenge to solve, but hyperlocal energy markets make a ton of sense. And with how stagnant US energy generation has been over the past, I want to say 50 years or so, it's been pretty much stagnant.
The only thing that's not stagnant is my bill.
So anyway, yeah, I think a shift to renewables is great. I think that DPINs are going to be some of the first to validate that at a national scale. I don't know if we'll be at a national scale in 2026, but I think we'll definitely be operating across the US, and most of the projects I mentioned already are.
Yeah. Are there any other like just general trends that you're seeing in DeepIn across the board? We talked a little bit about regulatory earlier, but not to, I guess, cue you up for it. Is anything outside of that?
Yeah, I think tying it back to transparency again, there's been a huge, like very broad push, maybe not even in DeepIn, but especially within DeepIn, for token transparency, for investor relations, and we're seeing that coming from multiple different avenues today. The no action letters that we mentioned are a great example. The SEC is coming around, and in a way, the SEC has validated that specific tokenomic models. Like if I built a separate network from Helium, but leveraged one-to-one Helium's tokenomic model, or Double Zero's or Fuse's tokenomic model, there's basically a blueprint for a regulatory compliant network that you can build. And so I think that's awesome to see. And I would say that three sort of DeepIn decisions slash issuances in the past year have been, it's enough to establish a precedent, at least in the short term. So that's great news for any DeepIn founders, especially those that have not yet launched their token. And then I think more broadly, again, tokenomics are just becoming more mature within DeepIn. You're seeing sort of these on-chain financing venues like DeFi popping up, which is really great. Obviously, that doesn't tie directly into the same sort of tokenomics that many other DeepIns operate with. And maybe it doesn't make a ton of sense to be financing hotspots on the Helium network, right? But tokenomics are becoming more mature, increased penetration into DeFi protocols, increased compatibility with different ecosystem tooling. And I think that's all sort of been built out in 2025 so that we can run in 2026.
Yeah, no, there's some really interesting trends growing. I was on a podcast yesterday and the host asked me if there were any cool like DeFi opportunities that I was seeing. And I kind of drew a blank. Probably didn't have enough coffee. And I sort of pointed to the standard, like, well, there's DEXs, there's, yada, yada. But we're seeing some really unique stuff popping up specifically around DeepIns. And later in the day, Fractals, I think it's fractals.fun.xyz, I can't remember. But they're doing some interesting things there of letting people own sort of smaller pieces of these larger venues and those cellular deployments. So it's neat to see people innovating in very bespoke ways, targeting this DeepIn space. And I think we're going to probably see a lot more of that in the coming year as well. Cool. Well, I guess we are approaching the deadline here. Yeah, RT just sent me the wrap it up message. Nick, where can people find you? Where can they follow your work?
So the Blockworks research platform is probably going to be the best place to find what I'm working on. Mostly reports on DeepIns / sort of adjacent sectors. Our Lightspeed IR platform from Blockworks will also be going live in Q1, so be on the lookout for that. And I'll be sure to amplify across my channels. And for sort of broad aggregate DeepIn ecosystem data, DeepIn Pulse is the best place to get that today. And obviously, I'm probably tagged on this post, but you can find me on X and feel free to shoot me a DM.
Cool, awesome. Any final thoughts for the Helium community going into 2026?
I think for a long time, Helium had this demand problem, and that is non-existent anymore. And so now really the focus is going to be scaling supply. So if you're listening to this, you're interested in Helium, maybe you've never deployed a hotspot before, buy your first hotspot, deploy it, start earning HNT. And additionally, I know there's at least been some chatter on X about what 2026 will look like for deployers and the incentives around scaling the deployer network. And I know Amir has teased a little bit of stuff out about that. But that said, it is, I think, probably the best time right now to be deploying a hotspot. So get out there, get your deployments off the ground, and let's scale the network together.
Awesome. I couldn't have asked for a better closer. Nick, thank you. Make sure you give this guy a follow. Check out the Blockworks Helium dashboard. And Nick, we'll talk soon.
Have a good one, Joey. Thanks for having
All
me.
right. Happy holidays.